Welcome to Lady Split Chin, new and improved for 2023. Just kidding, nothing is different because I can't change my entire personality based on the location of a spinny ball in relation to a really hot ball. I do have an appreciation for the chance to reflect on progresses that I have made over the course of last year, and even the placebo sense of a new era and a fresh start. Speaking of a fresh start, it is time for a redraw, except this is not one of my childhood drawings. No, it is time to address my long-lost love, Eenkashti, my very first D&D character, the forgotten Kalashtar Cleric. I did not expect to spend as much time on this drawing as I did. I thought this would be a regular 4-hour or so drawing, and I wanted to get a head start on it. However, no, this drawing took just over 8 hours, not quite as long as my Ash Elysia drawing, which took 12 hours, but I think this would be second place for speed draws that I have on my channel as of right now. As you can see here, I'm going in with the thumbnailing technique, and this alone took about an hour, and then more time outside of recording for consulting others for advice and thoughts. I came up with 10 different designs, and even the final design is modified from the sketch that I did end up choosing. I wasn't exactly sure of the look or pose that I wanted, and I didn't want to redraw Eenkashti in the outfit that I had originally put her in because of some major changes to her backstory from her first campaign to this new campaign, which I will get into later. What you need to know right now is that she's holding a military position and that the colors of her uniform were specified by my husband, the DM. How these 10 different outfits came to be: first, I began with 4 outfits on the bottom row, inspired strongly by art I had found on Pinterest and inspired by her previous designs and Witcher 3 armor pieces. Then from those designs, I picked my favorite aspects, as well as discussed with my husband what he thought were features he envisioned when dressing his army, and made 3 more designs. I started asking around for thoughts from my art friends and my sister as well, and after again confirming designs with my husband, I ended up refining 2 of the 3 designs. At this point, I decided to sleep on the designs and work on them another time because I forgot that the precise reason I did not go into graphic design or architecture is because getting everyone to come to a consensus about your personal design preferences is an impossible task, and it drains the soul. So here you can see I picked one of the designs, and I'm continuing to make changes to it. I wanted the outfit to still be visually appealing, but still cater to her personal preferences. She's a cleric, so she will not be able to use any heavy armor. She will need a uniform that will allow her general movement and quick range of motion with her hands so she can cast spells with somatic components, and the armor actually has to be relatively functional and protective. So I added a breastplate to go over the gambeson, as well as a chainmail piece to offer more protection to the lower half of her body. Now I know chainmail with a gambeson is listed in D&D 5e as heavy armor, but I don't want to hear it. This is just a design. I'm not going to base any additional points to armor class off of this look. Leave me alone. So let's get a little bit into the basics of Eenkashti. You may have heard me talk about her a couple times before, as she is my very first D&D character that I ever made, and a much loved character of mine and a Kalashtar Cleric. I don't hear a lot of people talk about Kalashtar, and for fair enough reason. Kalashtar from the Eberron book, which is the book where Warforged and Artificers come from, so the setting might have to be a little more modern and a little less traditional than a DM might be expecting. The second hurdle that comes with a Kalashtar is that the basis of them is that they are basically 2 spirits in one body. One spirit being human, one spirit being Quarry, which is a creature being from the dream realm, and also the source of a Kalashtar's psionic abilities. There is actually a pretty intense lore surrounding the whole merging of Quarry and humans and the results of that, which can really throw a wrench in a DM's plans. So in order to incorporate a Kalashtar more easily into a campaign, a DM will often replace the Quarry and the lore with some other kind of spirit, dark being, etc. And that's sort of what happened to Eenkashti. In her first campaign, she was possessed by some sort of creature that would take over her body from time to time. And you know, if I had a nickel for every time one of my D&D characters got possessed by something long term, I would have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Unfortunately, I cannot give a lot of details on what that secondary creature in Eenkashti's body was, because we never got super far into the campaign before time constraints and other things came up. So you may be wondering, what happened in the first campaign that caused everything to go awry? And if everything went so poorly with my first D&D experiences, how am I still incredibly passionate about D&D, and why did I decide to continue DMing campaigns on my own. I'll do my best to walk you through my first experiences as a D&D player and what I learned from it, and I'm not saying that I'm a D&D expert to be heralded for everything, and I'm not trying to scare you away from playing D&D, far from it. This is hardly even advice. I'm just expressing the importance of DMs and players to communicate and respect each other. See, the first communication mistake that was made in this first campaign was naively believing that any character would fit seamlessly into any campaign. After all, D&D wouldn't include a character in a book if it couldn't effectively be played in a campaign, right? Sort of. Matching character goals and ambitions with the setting is very important to a campaign. While race, class, etc. can often be retrofitted to work in any setting, if you and your DM are not on the same level of understanding about how you plan to interact with the world, there can be a little bit of grinding of gears. With Eenkashti, switching from a quarry spirit to some other kind of spirit more suitable for the campaign was not a big deal, since I had no built-up expectations or backstory that anticipated specific interactions with the quarry and the dream realms. However, another player had built a warforged artificer whose sole ambition was to take to the skies on an airship that he had built himself. A really cool concept. Until we found out that our setting would be medieval England, a la The Last Kingdom, a historical drama that I've never seen, but by all appearances, there isn't really a lot of room for steampunk-style shenanigans. And while the DM did his absolute best to incorporate the idea of warforged characters into the campaign, the player was left feeling as if there wasn't really a path to reach his character goals. Now, it's hardly either more the players or more the DM's fault for this happening. This was his first time DMing and his first time playing. Perhaps if the campaign went on, our artificer would have seen the opportunity to build and tinker more often. However, as a friendly reminder to DMs, including myself, the player was not able to see the big picture. It's really important to have an open communication with players about their characters and how their goals fit into the grand scheme of things. In fact, I have a few loose ends of my own that I need to communicate with some of my players because goals have shifted, things have changed. I'm not saying that a DM has to spoil every twist and turn planned for personal backstories, but it's important that you're not forcing someone else's character into a box that they didn't really plan to be in the first place. Which was another thing that I wish I had communicated with our DM. When I built Eenkashti, her original backstory was that she had hopped homes as a child due to the unpredictable, chaotic evil nature of her secondary spirit. At first, it would take over in small amounts, but she would find solace in her ritual worship practices as a cleric to her deity. But one day, Eenkashti would lose her entire consciousness to the secondary being, leaving many years a blank space in her mind. She would wake up one day covered in scars, no memory except muscle memory of battles that had happened while she was unconscious. I hinted to my DM of possibly military involvement, her face becoming a target for a reason unknown to her, but that ultimately that blank space in time would be up to him. When we all came back to the table, I found that my backstory had been somewhat altered. Instead of many years lost on her, she instead was battling this loss of consciousness almost constantly. She had destroyed temples in her youth, and the longest period of time of memory lost was at most a few weeks, the most recent of which where she had been convicted for a regicide she may or may not have committed. This didn't bother me too much. It placed me in essentially the same spot that my first backstory would have, with ever so slightly more dire circumstances, so I went with it. What ended up overwhelming me was the homebrew that my DM did to sort of mesh that desire to interact with a secondary spirit and the loss of consciousness. Because this was my first time playing, and because I have a really hard time communicating my personal needs and boundaries to others, I allowed my character to get swallowed up in a homebrew that I wasn't comfortable playing, because I didn't feel like I was familiar enough with the game to have an opinion, so I just said okay to everything. The first game we played, I found out that I was not playing just an order cleric, I was playing an order cleric with a funky wild magic table that I had to roll on every time I cast a spell. Now, keep in mind, at this time, I had no idea what wild magic tables were, and after being a plant for 3 rounds of combat after casting a single cantrip, and my entire party finishing the combat sequence without me, I became extremely hesitant to cast any additional spell because I was just completely unsure of the consequences. After that, there were some changes made to try and make my character more playable, but I still ended up having to roll something additional every time I cast a spell, which scared me out of a lot of actions that involved casting spells in sequence, being a part of the party's stealth missions, and using my Voice of Authority ability as an Order Cleric. What for my DM was just rearranging some abilities to try and make my backstory more prevalent was an absolute nightmare for a first-time cleric who had anticipated just being a backline support spellcaster. While maybe a little less homebrewing on the part of my DM could have helped, it was his first time to have to deal with balancing something out like that, and it would have helped him so much if I had just spoken up and told him exactly what was making it so miserable to play my character. What neither of us knew was just how important player-DM communication was for getting that to work out. Our table ended up ultimately disbanding because of time constraints and location changes, but I think we all left knowing that things were difficult because we had all rushed headlong into a campaign just for the sake of being into a campaign without realizing just how important it was to understand each other's expectations and goals. So, at the end of the day, DMs respect your players and players respect your DMs. And for goodness sake, just talk to each other. And to be honest, this is a call-out post for me. There's a lot more to be learned about D&D than just the rulebooks or how to spellcast, and I am certainly learning every day. The first table I played at had a communication issue, but there are dozens of more problems that can come up. And just because your first table isn't the one for you, doesn't mean your next one won't be. TTRPGs can be played a lot of different ways and vary a lot from group to group, and that's the beauty of it, and that's why I keep playing it. So let's finally talk about Eenkashti, new and improved. Eenkashti no longer has amnesia, but she does still have two souls, being formed in a way that is halfway between Witcher and Tattersail. Now I know that Gardens of the Moon from the Malazan Book of the Fallen series has been out since 1999, but I'm gonna give a quick spoiler from the first book, and you can mute me if you don't want to hear it. Long story short, Tattersail gets essentially consumed by magic, which combines her soul with two other souls, and she gets reborn as a new person that is also kind of three people in one. In this new campaign setting, the army is experimenting to recreate the scenario with a mixture of orphans, prisoners of war, and dead or dying war heroes and generals, to try and create the ultimate war machine, kind of like the Trial of Grasses does to make Witchers. Eenkashti is a combination of war general and orphan, which leads to an interesting conflict in her own personality. From the war general, she gets her voice of authority, her ability to command others to her will. However, for all the commanding skills in the world, she still possesses mostly healing and supporting abilities, and not many innate abilities for combat. She knows that she was born of a natural means, and she also knows that she was born of failure, unable to be the soulless killer that was intended of her. Her primary goal as of right now is just to be a useful asset, which is why early on in her journey she will likely be taking a couple points into sorcery to try and learn other abilities besides just healing. But there is a small voice in her head that tells her there's more to life than being useful for someone else. Also, it's canon that she hates wearing this cape. It's part of her uniform to wear in ceremonies and parades, but she prefers not to wear it. This stems from a humorous in hindsight interaction of me not wanting to include the cape in her design, while my husband preferred the cape. He didn't force me to draw it, but he did think it would be very amusing to canonically throw in Eenkashti hating capes as a fun little nod towards my design process. I decided to leave the cape, but Eenkashti's not happy about it. Eenkashti, more like Edna Kashti. Sorry. And that's all I have for Eenkashti. I know, it's not much, but that's because I'm waiting for our DM to develop a little bit more of his world and to talk to him more about my character goals and progression, because I have learned from my mistakes this time. All I know is that this time around I get all my psionic abilities, including the telepathy, and I get a chance to build my ideal Order Cleric Sorcerer build. This is a build I've been sitting on for a long time, in fact, since I've made Eenkashti, and I've talked about it before. Order Clerics at first level have an ability called Voice of Authority. Whenever a first level spell is cast to target an ally, the ally can immediately use their reaction for an additional attack. So for non-D&D folks, a reaction usually occurs under specific conditions. such as an opponent within range of you deciding to run away, then you can use your reaction to take an attack of opportunity and strike them as they flee. Now, the reason why I want to take a few sorcerer levels is because of the 3rd level sorcerer ability for meta magic. This allows a user to manipulate spells. A sorcerer might be able to extend how long a spell lasts, or change the damage type of the spell to try and target an enemy vulnerability, and my favorite on the long list, twin spells. Voice of Authority can only work on one person per spell slot, no matter if the spell targets multiple people or not. Being able to twin spell essentially allows a spell to target more than one person, acting as a secondary spell slot without using an actual spell slot, meaning that I can target a second person with my Voice of Authority ability in a single turn. I will be the ultimate support, popping spells off to heal the other players while they can take additional attacks that they may or may not have been able to take later. Now, depending on how the story and party progresses, I may decide to lean more towards sorcery or keep building cleric. A lot of people recommend furthering sorcery for this build because as you level up, you get more sorcery points, which means you can twin spell more often and all sorts of fun things. But I think I'm leaving this one up to Eenkashti. You might anticipate to play your character one way and find out a different route was right all along. Take Ford in Critical Role's Campaign 2, for example. He started as a warlock, and partway through the campaign, he gave up that path to become a paladin instead, because it suited his character and the route the campaign was taking. And I'm a little more prepared this time for the unexpected, so we'll see where Eenkashti leads me. I know I haven't talked much at all about the art in this video. I'll try to talk about it a little more after the speed draw section has been completed. But if any of you are followers that came from Instagram and have been around that long, you might know that I frequently draw Eenkashti with a 3rd eye, which I have not done here. That's because it's flavor. The 3rd eye was an event that happened as a result of wild magic in the first campaign, so it might manifest differently in the second campaign. I did get approval to have a 3rd eye appear during magic use, the details of which the DM and I will figure out later, but I did want to draw one base Eenkashti without the 3rd eye, just for character profile picture and base appearance. You can see here I imply a 3rd eye appearing in a sort of purple rune on her forehead as a nod towards that. But oops, I guess I'll just have to draw Eenkashti again in the future with a 3rd eye and give you progress updates about how she's doing. Oh no, a tragedy indeed. Anyways, here is Eenkashti in all her glory. She takes on a much darker, less innocent role this campaign, and she has a lot more knowledge about her origins, and she's driven more by duty and less by fear. And I think it's a good new look on her. This is character growth for both me and Eenkashti, and I'm super excited to see where this goes. As for the drawing overall, I'm pretty happy with how it came out. I will admit that my patience was running out many a time. She's got a lot of hair, and the chainmail was worse than drawing hair, and when I got to the cape, I was not having a good time, but honestly, all that is extremely on brand. My least favorite part of the drawing was probably the chainmail, not for how hard it was to draw, and I think the technique I used was pretty cool, just that it looks very light in the drawing. I wish I had let it fall more straight downward. I had it flaring out as if she were coming down very quickly and elegantly from the sky, but with her toes touching the ground, it sort of changes the whole look, and I didn't really do much in post to account for that. Nonetheless, I'm proud of the work that I did on her. I love the tiny details. I adore how the breastplate came out, and I hope you guys all like it too. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the end of the video, and as for Eenkashti, we'll see what the future has in store for her. Who knows? Not me.